All right, so we got a ton of requests to take a deep dive into the security side of the SAP Customer Activity Repository 5.0 FPS 04
Yeah, the administration guide.
Administration Guide. You got it.
It can be pretty dense.
Oh, yeah,
But honestly, this is such an important system for businesses.
totally.
Making sure it's secure is, well, kind of a big deal.
And that's exactly what we're going to do today, cut through all the technical jargon and give you a clear picture of how this thing keeps your data safe.
Exactly. We want to make sure you walk away knowing the why and the how of SAP car security.
So right off the bat, the guide jumps into why security is so crucial these days, especially with more and more systems moving online.
Right. And it's not just about those stereotypical hackers in hoodies, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
It's really about supporting your business goals while making sure that sensitive information is locked down.
Right, so preventing any unauthorized access.
Exactly. And, just as importantly, it's about making sure the system can handle those unexpected hiccups, like user errors or even someone trying to deliberately mess things up.
You mean like malicious attacks?
Exactly. It's about building a system that can withstand any kind of threat and keep your data safe and sound.
Gotcha. So resilience is key, and then the guide dives into how the data itself, how it moves around, and even the processes within SAP Car are all protected.
Right. And they get pretty granular with it, which I know can seem overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But what's important to remember is that security measures are applied at different stages. So like when someone manually creates a transaction.
Right.
Well, in that case, the system uses the standard SAP dialog user authorizations.
Okay, so it's using existing SAP security.
Right. Building on that, now if data is coming in electronically, like say through iDocs, those electronic documents in SAP,
Sure.
or through BAPIs, those interfaces for business processes. Well, that's when those SAP communication user authorizations come in, along with encryption, especially for sensitive stuff like credit card info.
Encryption keeps popping up, so it sounds like it's a pretty big deal.
Oh, it's absolutely essential. And it's not just when data is moving, but also when it's stored in the database.
Makes sense.
And what about those situations where the system needs to send data out? Things like sales reports or, current inventory levels.
Good point. What happens then?
Well, for those outbound data flows, the guide emphasizes those SAP communication user authorizations again. But it also talks about different protocols like ALE, TRFC, that method for moving data between SAP systems.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the usual web protocols like HTTPS and RFC, which is another standard SAP communication protocol.
So a whole bunch of options.
Exactly. And the choice really depends on a few things, like how sensitive the data is and where it's going.
Makes sense.
And even when someone is running an analytical query, their access is still controlled through those SAP HANA database user privileges.
Ah, so every single interaction is locked down.
Exactly. It's not just about protecting the data itself, but about controlling every single interaction with it.
So that brings us to managing the users themselves. And I noticed the guide talks about using SAP NetWeaver for this.
Yeah, SAP RR leverages the well-established user management system within SAP NetWeaver, which makes things a lot simpler.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but there's a key point here. You got to make sure you're also following those specific SAP INA security guidelines for any content that's actually stored within the SAP HANA database.
So an extra layer of security.
Exactly. And you'll be working with familiar tools like SU01. That's the transaction code for maintaining users.
Right.
And then there's PFCG for managing roles and authorizations.
Mm-hmm.
The guide makes a distinction between those individual users, the actual people,
Right.
and then the technical users, which are basically set up for system-to-system communication.
Okay.
And one of the big takeaways here, they really hammer this home. Change those default user IDs and passwords.
Oh, yeah, that's important for any system.
Oh, absolutely. And if you're already using single sign-on, well, good news, SAP CAR can integrate with that seamlessly.
Nice. So we've covered who the users are, but now how do we actually control what they can do once they're in?
That's where authorizations come into play, and this is where things get really interesting.
Lay it on me.
So the authorization framework within SAP CAR, it builds on what's already there in SAP NetWeavers.
Okay, so more building on existing security.
Exactly. It's all about assigning specific roles to each user.
So what they can do depends on their role.
Right. And these roles are managed in PFCG, and they define exactly what each user is allowed to do within the system, no more, no less.
Now, I remember reading something about SAP HANA authorizations, like they're handled a bit differently.
You've got a good eye, you're right. For any content that lives in the SAP HANA database, there's this whole other layer of control through specific SAP HNA database access privileges.
Another layer. Wow.
It's all about that layered approach, right? And what's really cool is there's this tool called the Analytics Authorization Assistant,
Okay.
and it can actually translate those existing SAP NetWeaver authorizations into the equivalent SAP HNA privileges.
So it does the work for you.
Exactly. Saves you a ton of time and reduces the chance of any errors.
Love that. Now, lastly, the guide touches on naming conventions. And I'll admit, at first I thought, how important can this really be?
Well, it's one of those things that seems small, but can cause a lot of headaches down the road.
Really?
Yeah, because sometimes different terms are used to refer to the same thing. Like you might see article in one place and product or material somewhere else.
Oh, I see. It can get confusing.
Yeah, and this inconsistency can make it tricky to understand how authorizations are actually being applied.
That makes sense.
And on top of that, you need to know how to spot those key system variables, things like SOFAN ADB, to make sure your security settings are properly configured.
Gotcha. So every detail matters when it comes to security.
Absolutely. You got to
Yeah.
sweat the small stuff.
Okay, so to wrap things up, what we've seen from this deep dive into the SAP car security guide is that it's all about a multi-layered approach, right?
Absolutely.
We've got data that's being secured both when it's moving and when it's just sitting there in the database.
Right.
We're controlling who can access the system in the first place.
Yep.
And then we're managing what they can do once they're in using those user roles and authorizations.
Right.
And these controls actually extend all the way to the SAP HNA database itself.
Right. It's comprehensive.
And then we even touched on how those seemingly small things, like naming conventions, can have a big impact on security.
It really can.
So yeah, it's a comprehensive system, and having a solid grasp of all these security aspects is, well, it's crucial for anyone working with SAP Customer Activity Repository.
Absolutely. It's the foundation for a secure and compliant environment.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, here's something to think about as you go forward. With all these layers of security and all the different types of access, how can you proactively stay on top of things? Like, what steps can you take to make sure you're continuously reviewing and refining those user permissions within your system?
Yeah, that's a great point.
You know, to really implement that principle of least privilege, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process, and I think that's a great takeaway for everyone.
I agree.
Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure as always.
Anytime.
And for all of you listening out there, keep those questions coming. We'll see you next time.